And welcome to penpodcast.com with your co-host Nico Penn, again of Pen for Hire NYC. Today we are joined by John David Mann, one of the best sellers for New York Times 4 times and 5 national bestsellers. And his writings have been featured in American Executive, Financial Times, Forbes, Leadership Excellence, Huffington Wired, Crime Reads, and many others. Welcome, John. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Nico. I'm especially proud of the crime reads thing. That last thing you said, that was like my crowning glory. I always wanted to have an essay in crime reads, and a year ago I did, and I got another one coming up pretty soon. So I'm
look at you
pretty
tackling
jazzed about
everything.
that. Yeah, man.
And how difficult has it been trying to get into something that you really want to get into?
I've been doing it my whole life, so it's difficult, but it's a
Wow.
challenge. It's my life has been like a series of cascading careers in different areas. I always seem to be jumping into something new. Is it difficult? I guess it is. It must be, because I do like a challenge, and this has been the books have been extraordinarily difficult to write. But I will tell you this. To go from what I was doing, what I've been doing my whole writing career, nonfiction and business and leadership and memoirs of business leaders and political leaders and interesting people, and to go from that sphere to writing crime fiction, it was a difficult process for me, but the crime fiction world has made it easy. I mean, they're such lovely people. For years, I used to hear crime writers are the nicest people in the world. And I go, wait, it doesn't add up. How is that? The people who spend their days dreaming up these ghoulish, grisly murders and terrible things. No, it's actually true. Really, really, really sweet people. So I feel very welcomed in that world.
Did you use that as like a motivation or an inspiration in order to keep fueling yourself, in order to keep going and pushing yourself to become the best writer possible in order to gain access into that crime reads?
I just do that anyway. That's just my modus operandi. I like to. I have a very high standard in terms of. I don't want to write a parable. I want to write a really, really compelling, excellent parable that changes a million people's lives. It's like that's how I want to do writing, and that's what I want to do with a crime novel. I don't just want to write a whodunit. I want to write a novel that 50 years from now, people are reading it and saying, "Oh, I learned something. Wow." I want to write books that matter, that make a difference. And so what I will say to your question is to have praise and championing and support from people like Lee Child and Robert Crace and Brad Thor, these guys who are like, to say they're the heroes of my craft is almost too small. They're like giants, right?
Right.
To have them be so welcoming and also to be so enthusiastic about the books, about the Finn books, it's a really nice kind of confirmation, and that does certainly help. It helps keep me going. When writers write to me, people who want to write parables or whatever things that I've done, I'm always mindful of the kind of charge and energy and sustenance I get from my heroes, saying, "You're doing great. You knocked it out of the park." Robert Cray said, "You guys hammered home a grand slam." And it's like, it was a tweet he sent me. And I've lived off that, that one line tweet for 12 months now. So I always want to do the same thing for starting writers.
Now, for those that don't know, how long have you been a published author?
I spent a lot of years before that in the writing world, largely as an editor, editing other people's stuff. And
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I did a lot of editing. Again, particularly in the business, nonfiction, leadership, personal development, in that sales
for publication
leadership.
books,
for journals, mostly for magazines.
Okay.
And then from there, leading into for books. Leading from there into helping other people get their books done, ghostwriting other people's books. And then, that finally led to co-authoring books and writing
Hmm.
books as an outgrowth. It wasn't my plan. It just kind of developed that way. Once,
Interesting.
you know what it is, Nico? It's like once I got to where I am in terms of authoring books, it's
Hmm.
like, oh, this is what I always wanted to do. I didn't know that. I didn't,
Interesting.
yeah, it's like my wife. This is the person I've always wanted to marry. I didn't know that until I
Wow.
saw her. I didn't know that
Right.
until we became friends and we started talking. And one day I'm like, oh my, this is like, I couldn't have planned this better. This is what writing books is like for me. This is what I've
Right.
always wanted to do. I just never knew it.
Wow, that's so cool. That's so cool. I understand that sensation entirely. Now,
Yeah.
also, did you start writing at like a younger age, like in middle school, elementary school, or did you start writing college years, 20s ish?
I have tremendous admiration for all these writers that I love hearing writers talk about their careers. I always find it so
Hmm.
fascinating, and there's so much variety. People have such
Right.
different career paths. But I hear a
Hmm.
lot of writers talk about how, when they were 5 years old, they were writing stories. And Stephen King talks about his little newspaper he started in high school, and then people talk about in college, working on their first. Not me, man. I was like, I am such a late bloomer, man. It's
Hmm.
ridiculous. I mean, I remember writing papers in school and writing little
Hmm.
stories in school, but
Oh, that's
no,
cool.
no, no. The first book that it's not literally the first book I wrote, but it was one of the first few books I wrote. It was the first book that went anywhere. Is The Go-Giver,
Mm.
the parable, and that book came out in 2008. That's like 14 years ago. It hasn't been that long that I've actually been doing this publishing books thing. It's been a little over a decade. It's been 14 years, I guess.
Oh
So
yeah,
no, I
man.
didn't start young. No, I did not.
No, no,
Short
but
answer.
oh no, but even so, that allows you to still have a veteran presence over those that even did, because some people that started, let's say in like 2020, you have enough capability to explain to them, like as you mentioned earlier, that people are starting to look up to you. You're starting to be their hero essentially,
Yeah.
because now you've had a lot of success selling your books, as well as getting onto different newsletters, different journals, different websites, on both ends of the floor, on the fiction and the nonfiction side.
Yeah, and also a lot of experience, with failure, and or let me say that better. A lot of experience in the trenches making my stuff better. Taking a
Mm,
first draft and doing a lot of work with it.
hmm.
Taking a book that didn't sell at first and then reworking it and reworking it. And in some cases, it never sold. I've had a bunch of books that I've either written or written
Hmm.
part of, um, that have never sold and probably never will. And I've also had books that sold, that published, that I'm very proud of and that I love dearly and that have devoted readers, just not very many devoted readers that
Hmm.
had not been huge commercial successes. And I've had books that have done really well. So I feel like I've had a lot of experience on all sides of the spectrum. The tip of the iceberg, which is the successful stuff that people see, and then the whole iceberg underneath. Hey, and it's Mr. Matthew himself. Hi, a surprise guest.
I had no intention of being here. I've been on a writing hiatus.
I see.
So I apologize for every and anything. But once I got the alert, we just finished baseball practice. Not going to say I'm a Yankee fan just because I'm from the
No.
Bronx, but my kids' team is the Yankees. We just won 10-0. And I walked in and I said, if
Congrats.
they're still on, I am crashing this interview. So I'm crashing this interview.
For those of you who don't know, this is Matthew Harms, and this is Nico Penguin's associate. I knew I would not. And he's like an old friend, so it's really good to see you. It's really cool. Nico,
I'm
Matt, people.
literally going to let you guys jump right back to it. I am not here to steal anyone's thunder. I'm probably going to walk in a second. But I'm here for a little bit till my 8:30 client call. I just wanted you to know I appreciate you both.
Mhm.
And I could not be here.
Yeah, well, thank you for the connection to David Licken, by the way. That's really it's been enormously fruitful and wonderful for us.
That is irony, because David Licken is the client I'm meeting in 18 minutes.
Well, please say hello. Yes.
Wow, crazy coincidence.
My wife and I are on his podcast tomorrow. I mean, we're recording tomorrow.
Wow, you can't make that up. Oh my Lord.
So there's a point to make here. There's a point to make here, which is a point you could learn, in any kind of other setting than writing. But so Matthew, Anna, my wife and I were on this podcast with Matt being the guy in the chair, and afterwards he, for no reason he was compelled to do, he just said, you should talk to this other guy, this client that I have, just because I think the two of you would connect. And he connected us, and it's been an extraordinarily fruitful connection. You never know when you do a podcast. You never know when you do an interview. You never know when you write a blog post, when you write an article, when you edit someone's book. You just never know. In my experience, in my life, all of the greatest things that have ever happened to me came from the side I didn't see coming. None of them came from where I was looking.
Oh my goodness.
This career is that way. My wife, I mentioned, is that way.
Oh, really?
This connection, yeah. It's like I was not like hunting for this person.
Wow.
It just happened. So yeah, just follow your heart, and good things drop out of the sky.
So do you focus on other stuff?
Hold on, I'm gonna give you the forum back. I promise, Nico. I'm shutting up in 30 seconds.
I'm just so interested in what he has to say.
Point that I get a lot of guests or people who want to be on the show, and they ask for downloads and likes and all of this. Yes. And my answer is always, I don't even track it because I don't care. My goal is to meet great people who have great messages and connect them to people who want to receive them. Yeah. And if the only thing 275 episodes of Pen Podcast has accomplished is connecting you with David Licken, my job is done. It's not the only one. There's several others. This is the most notable one that you're vocalizing. That's what I live for. That's why I started this. I met Nico. Nico was a guest on my podcast.
Correct.
And I needed to expand. I needed help, and he was one
cool.
who impressed me the most. That I said,
very cool.
Do this too. So, with that said, people, do not look at the immediate what's in it for you. When you look at what's in it for you, there's never anything in it for you. How you can pay it forward, because it always comes back. So, gentlemen, please continue. I'm going to hang out for a few minutes before David jumps in, but I promise I will not interrupt you again unless someone asks me to.
You're a mentor, sir.
John, you were saying that you pretty much did a lot of things and you weren't intending to. Does that also mean meeting or discussing with Brandon regarding starting this partnership as well?
Yeah, that's what a fantastic segue too, because it's true. And I'm going to approach this from two sides. The people who know me well have heard both of these vectors converging on the point of these novels. One of them is, for years, my wife, who's always my first reader and my best one. And she's the first person who reads anything I've done. And she's also, I think, I consider my most valuable critical reader, and also my biggest champion. She used to say to me, "You would write great novels." And I would say, "I appreciate the vote of confidence." And the subtext, in case you're not getting what that really means, it means, yeah, I don't think so.
Right.
So she would say, "No, I think you would write great novels." And I would say, thank you. I appreciate that vote of confidence. Like, nah, I would not. And then I would come to her. I would read some book, and I would come and I would say, "I got to tell you, this thing that this author did, it's amazing. She's phenomenal. She wove these two things. She created this incredible thing. Let me read a passage," and she would go, "Wow, that is incredible. You could do that. You could do that. You could do that better."
Wow.
And I would say, please don't say that. It's like, makes me uncomfortable.
Right.
This went on for years. So, back in 2009, a little over a decade ago now, my agent put me and Brandon together. Brandon is for those who don't know, former Navy SEAL sniper, instructor. And Brandon wanted to write a memoir, and she said, "You're a good writer, Brandon, but you need to bring in the pros from Dover. You need a guy to do this with you." So she put us together. So I, with no military background, you know how they say, write what you know?
Right.
Great advice as far as it goes, but it can also be a safe thing to do, to write what you know. I mean, I know it worked for John Grisham, and that's awesome. And I know it worked for, a lot of people. They write from their career. That's great. But to write about something that you don't know at all, that you're a complete stranger to,
Mhm.
it's a thrilling process. And that was writing with Brandon. Writing his memoir was a thrilling process because I didn't know anything about the military. I
Right.
didn't know anything about the Navy. I didn't know how they talk, how they walk, how they think, how
Mhm.
they eat, how they interact, let alone what they do in the battlefield.
Mhm.
And so because I had to learn it all from the ground up, I was never at risk of talking down to my readers because I was learning it along with them.
Right.
And so I had to be able to understand something in the military well enough so I could put it in plain words so that
Mhm.
I got it. Consequently, anybody could read that book, even if they
Mhm.
knew nothing about the military, and they would get it all.
Right.
Because they were on the same road I was on. So anyway, we had a blast with that book. And one of the first conversations we said, Brandon said, "Would you ever be interested in writing a novel together?" And I went,
Hmm.
oh, inside I clenched and every cell in
Uh-oh.
my body is saying, no, no,
Uh-oh.
tell him
Him
no, run
too. Him
away. And so,
too.
of course, I said, totally, man, I'm in. Yeah, you name it. You name your place. And so the deal was sealed in 2009. It took us a decade before we both had sort of the time and the professional space to get together and write it. And
Wait,
that
what?
became last year's
Wait,
Steel
hold on, go
Fear.
back. You said it took you guys
2009,
it took you guys 10 years
2009,
to do what?
10 years to be able to carve out the time and space to do that.
Mhm.
You know, we wrote a bunch of other nonfiction books, a bunch of
Mhm,
other
mhm.
memoirs, and some books on mastering your fears and so forth. But finally, 10 years later, we did it. We sat down, and that was my first novel. And my wife felt vindicated because I wrote novels. And now you couldn't stop me. You couldn't pry me off of these things with a crowbar. The first
Well,
novel came out last year, Steel Fear. I
mhm.
dedicated it to my wife for telling me for decades that I should write novels.
Right,
And she
right.
kept telling me until I believed it too.
Wife. Mhm.
And then the sequel is the book we're here to talk about tonight, Cold Fear, sequel coming out in, beginning of June. And so that I owe it to, or I could say I blame Brandon and my wife together,
And
two
that's actually
victors
a
who got
pretty
me to do this.
cool cover that you actually have there. I love the color scheme. I love when covers just like pull you in and just make it so intriguing. Like, the green popping out, the blue, the big wording, shouting out your own names and giving you guys that expertise because you are a New York Times bestseller as well. Just making sure that it's continuing the great book that you did prior to.
Well, I give our publisher enormous credit. Both
Mhm,
the cover design for the first book and for this book, and also the interior design.
mhm.
It's subtle stuff, but it's great to have a team, like that working with you.
Do you ever feel vindicated sometimes when you're like, man, I should have done this a little bit sooner? My wife was 100% right.
Always, totally. Yeah. However, I've created a sort of operating philosophy for myself a long time ago, which
Hmm.
is resist regret.
Hmm.
I don't allow myself regrets. If I started down the road of regrets, I could go down forever. All the things that I wish I could go back and have done
Same
differently.
thing.
Nah,
Hmm.
it's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's like it's a road to nowhere. So, do I wish I'd done it earlier? The truth is, I didn't do it earlier. I did this now, and here it is, and everything is the way it should be. I am thrilled that I'm doing it now. Is basically what it is.
And then when you get your feedback from like editors or
Yes.
your beta readers and it's actually positive, do you ever think like, wow, like now I have more than just my wife and more than just Brandon letting me know that this is actually pretty good?
When I hear from my beta readers and beta readers who say this is great, we love this, we love this, we love this, I kind of like, yeah, I'm reading through that until I get to the one that says, okay, here's what doesn't work for me. and my editors come back when my editor. Well, here, let me back up a second, Nico, because that's actually a great question. Let me back up
Mhm,
and say this. Steel Fear, the first novel, it really worked. It just clicked. There were so many things going into that story that really worked.
mhm,
People would just hear the premise. A disgraced Navy SEAL stalks a serial killer on board an aircraft carrier in the middle
mhm.
of the Pacific Ocean. People just hear that pitch and go, oh God, I got to read that book.
Right.
It's almost like the book could not fail. So the challenge for me was, what do you do for a sequel? And
Mm,
I find that enormously challenging, enormously intimidating. I started work on Cold Fear. My biggest challenge was my own insecurity about that. It's like, well, what if it isn't as good as the first book? What if people don't like it as much as the first book? What if it isn't as engaging as the first book? So I will say that when our editor got back the first draft, she wrote me and said, I'm blown away. That was a relief. It was good to hear.
Hey,
however, that said, what's really what my spidey sense is all tuned into is the stuff that comes next when she says, okay, there are some things I think don't quite work the way they are. And that's been such a fascinating journey for me, because here I am 30 books later with some critical acclaim, and you'd think that I'd be like pretty impervious by now.
Right.
And the editor comes back and says, here are a few things that don't work. And my first reaction is like, no. Right. That can't be true. You're wrong.
Right.
And it's just like, oh, just stab me in the heart with a knife 100 times. So what happens, and this, to me, it's such a valuable process. What happens is I go like, I let myself have those feelings. I let myself have the feeling of complete defensiveness and woundedness, and that infant's like, no, it's my toy. Gimme. The way I wrote it is the best way. There's no improving this. Your ideas are terrible and you stink. Go with that. Let myself, but in my brain, in my intellectual, tucked away capabilities, part of me is whispering, she's probably right. She's probably right. And I do. I know it in some part of my brain that she's probably right, but I can't see it. I can't let it in. I can't feel it. Right. And so I will say, I need some time, and I do. I need a couple of days at least. Usually I take like 3, 4, or 5 days. And then I'm kind of rolling her thoughts around, and in Steel Fear, when we got back first editor comments.
Do you bounce it off anybody, by the way, when you're
my wife? Yeah, my wife, and she's great with this. But it takes me usually a few days before I can even vocalize it to her. I'm just in it myself.
No, I understand that. I understand. It hurts. It's painful. That's like your baby. It's
so
like an insult too at the same time. It's like
it is.
They're insulting your intelligence and whatnot. And it's like,
and you know what? It should be that way. That's the way it should be, because if you didn't feel that way, if you didn't care that much about what you wrote, why are you writing it?
Exactly.
You should feel that way. You should feel wounded. And so this is all good and normal. It's just that I have to, like, what I'm doing, I'm looking for, she's probably right. Can I see it? Can I get it to the level where, and I'll finally like throw her ideas around. Well, what if we did like half of what she says? Or what if we did what she says a little bit? She's saying we should just totally lose this character. Well, what if we make the character a little bit less, or just change their, some quality? What if I can bargain with the stuff that she said?
Exactly.
And eventually I get to the point where I go, God, I just saw it. I just got it.
Exactly.
If I do what she just said, it'll make the book better.
Exactly.
It makes a better book. And it does. And it does. I have a great editor. I've had a lot of great editors that I just adore, because they can see something I can't see about what I'm doing.
Yes.
And so, it's a painful process, but it's also a really thrilling process, because in the process, the damn story gets better. And I'm so grateful for it now, because there's stuff in Cold Fear that I just think is killer, if you'll excuse the expression, that weren't there when in the first draft. So
now in regards to the process, what is your favorite part of creating the character of Finn to life? Like, do you have somebody particular in mind when you're writing about him, or is he inspired by somebody? How do you find the joy of writing about him?
Well, that's a great question, because I know that there's teachers that I admire and that I've studied with who say, for a novel, before you start the novel, sit down and sketch out your character and just spend time in your character's shoes, get in their skin. Ask yourself, 20 questions, 50 questions, 100 questions. Where did they go to school? Who was their favorite teacher? What was the first time they ever had their pride hurt? What's their favorite flavor? What movie do they hate? What movie do they love? Ask all these questions and come up with the answers, and just get to know this character like you know yourself. I tried. I can't really do that. It doesn't. I tried it with Finn, and I tried it with a few other characters in Steel Fear, and I got somewhere. I started to flesh out a little bit. What happens for me is I start out with a situation, and I got a couple of characters that I know are in play, and I don't know that much about them. So they're kind of two-dimensional, stand-in cardboard models of characters at this point. And then I start developing the story, developing the plot, and the situation, and say, well, he's looking for something. How does he go about looking for it? And she is trying to find him. How does she go about looking for him? And he is going to be shocked when he discovers something. What is that something? I don't even know. So I start asking questions and playing with the story. And as the story develops, the characters start to come to life. And I'll just be out walking the dog, and I'll suddenly go, oh, you know what? I just realized something about her. I just realized something about him. I'll start just getting little glimpses of how this character reacts in this situation. And then I'll get to a point where I'll sit down, and one morning, I'll just sit down on my computer and just start, and I'll go for a page of stuff that has just kind of come up. But for me, it's kind of a weird process where it's a going back and forth between my situation, my story, drafting it and kind of asking myself questions and story developing, and then suddenly having characters come to life, and then taking the character and asking myself questions about them, and then fleshing out the profile, and then putting the profile back in the story and seeing how does it act. And you kind of go back and forth, and in the process, which is messy and is not linear, it's very circular and feels almost inefficient.
Almost infinite.
In the process, it starts to feel like this is real. I remember there are characters where I remember the moment they came to life for me on the page. And it's funny, when Steel Fear was maybe a week, maybe 10 days away from the drop dead deadline where it had to be in, so they could start doing copy editing and blah blah. The production had to happen, and this is like I couldn't miss this deadline.
Right.
The editor came back and said, "There's this one character that still just isn't working for me." It was a secondary character, a small character, but an important one. And this character is just like feels a little bit like a caricature, like it's kind of like a cartoon character of who this person would be. And I realized that she was absolutely right. And I kicked that character out. I just lost him altogether and brought in a brand new character. And so, it happens at all stages of the process, early and late, where suddenly, a character bursts to life. And that's a thrilling process for me.
And so in that moment where the issue is that it's not fitting, you're capable of understanding what the solution requires, because earlier you were saying that you'd like to think about what the situation calls for, so that it needs like a different kind of character in order to make that scene or that situation or the story continue to play out as you want it to.
Right.
I said I wasn't going to interrupt, but Nico, write that down. John, hold your thought. I have a quick question before I leave or stay, because I just texted David Licken letting him know that I'm on this podcast.
Yes.
And he is willing to jump on with us. If you're all interested in this, like we could really make this an unseen, or I could just step out and go do my client meeting with David. So I'm going to leave that up to you, gentlemen, because I work for you. You don't work for me.
I'm going to leave that up to you guys, because you guys are the hosts. I'm here to please. So
I'm fine with anything.
I think this will literally the first time this has ever happened on Penn Podcast. And we've got a John David Mann, a David Licken. I can't see how this could go wrong. So I will let you continue answering that question. I will deal with him. I'll take myself off camera. I'll bring him in back scene, and then I'll figure out how to work this in, and we will roll with that. I think this is incredible.
All right. I'm in.
All right, you guys keep going. I'm going to take myself off camera for a second and coordinate with David.
All righty. Okay.
So part of it is, like, in procedurals, you have your detective who's like tracking clues. That's me writing the book. In a way, the process of writing a book like this, and even a shorter book, a parable like The Go-Giver, I feel a little bit like a detective searching for clues, because I know there's a book in there, and I don't really know what it is. I just know that it's there, and I know that, and so I start looking for clues, and that's really what kind of what we're talking about. I wade into the situation. in the first book's case, the situation was this SEAL drops onto an aircraft carrier. Nobody knows why he's there. He's not even sure why he's there. In the new book, the situation is Finn, my SEAL with memory issues and a traumatic past. My SEAL has dropped himself in the middle of Iceland in the week between Christmas and New Year's. So Iceland in the middle of winter, right at the right near the lip of the Arctic Circle. This is why it's called cold fear.
Right near freezing, everything freezing, everything.
Finn is looking for 3 guys, and as he steps onto the scene, a woman mysteriously drowns herself in a pond in the corner of the one unfrozen corner of a pond in the middle of downtown Reykjavik, and nobody knows why. And also, nobody has any idea what does she have to do with Finn. And also, as I'm starting to write this book, I have no idea what does she have to do with Finn. All I knew was I wanted to start with this woman running through the street and then drowning herself in this pond. I wanted to start with a drowning, and I wanted there to be an attempt to survive a drowning near the end of the book. I wanted the book to be framed by these 2 drowning scenes. I didn't know why, and I didn't know what it meant. So a lot of the process of writing the book was not only discovering who the characters are, but also discovering what the hell's going on. Like, what is the situation here? Why did she drown? What is he looking for? Why does he need to find these guys? And it is, there are certain things as an author that you figure out early on and that are going to happen at the end, and that you hold off telling the reader so they'll have the fun of finding it. But there are also things that are a mystery to me as I'm writing it. And that to me is one of the great joys of writing crime fiction, is I'm the first reader trying to figure it out.
Interesting. Now who dictates how the story goes? Is it the characters, or is it you?
It's mostly me. I won't lie. It's mostly me, and I brainstorm this with Brandon, since there are 2 of us. I do most of the hands-on writing. Brandon is, and one would assume that what Brandon contributes is his military background and lend authenticity. And that's true to a degree. But what he really contributes is actually something quite different. What Brandon really contributes is he's got this, and I think this is a trait that's common to many SEALs. It's a SEAL. SEALs aren't big, brawny, athletic, muscle men. SEALs have a certain kind of sort of intellectual athletic prowess. It's a mindset. SEALs SEALs are disciplined, and also they're problem solvers. They are trained to be, when necessary, an army of one. One of the traits of a SEAL
engineers
is they're like human engineers. They're ingenious at working out solutions to problems. And Brandon is a cool partner to brainstorm plot issues. And so that's the biggest part of how we interact. Is I'll go to him and say, we brainstorm the setting. The starting situation is we collaborate on, and then I'll start to develop the setting, the situation, and I'll go to him and say, dude, this happens and this happens. I have no idea why, and how would this happen, and what would that? And he'll start to brainstorm on that. So I forgot your original question, but you said who dictates the outcome? Is it me or the characters?
Yes,
it's mostly me. But what'll happen is sometimes this happens like 2 or 3 times in a book in a big way. I'll be going along in the story, kind of fleshing out what I've already planned. And all of a sudden, this idea will come smacking at me out of the blue. That this character suddenly does something that to me seems completely out of character. But the moment I get it, I know it's right. I know it's like, I got to do this, but it makes no sense. This happened to me several times. I'm working on the 3rd book right now, but it happened to me in the middle of Cold Fear, when Finn finally gets 2 of these 3 SEALs, and he's basically interrogating them about who killed his best friend, or his lieutenant, who, if Finn had such a thing as friends, this guy would have been his best friend.
Right.
And the answer the guy comes up with knocked me out of my chair. I was actually sitting at my desk, frustrated early one morning, and I didn't know what to do with the story. I didn't know how the scene was supposed to end. And I got up, I started folding laundry, and I was folding T-shirts. And all of a sudden I went, I dropped the shirt and went, oh my God.
What?
He suddenly blurts out this. And I go, that makes no sense. But it's what he blurts out.
Right.
And it took the whole plot of the book and went, over this way. And it's like the book wouldn't be the book without that. But I did not see it coming. And that will happen. It just happened yesterday morning. I was walking my dog down the street, and I was dealing with a scene in the beginning of this third book, which is not yet written. And I suddenly went, oh, at the very end, this happens. This character does something that I completely did not expect. And that the reader, I promise you, will not expect, because I didn't.
Right.
And it's like, it's what we got to do. Now I got to reverse engineer and figure out how to make it make sense.
So that's where I'm going to jump in. That is a perfect segue, John David Mann.
Yes.
I had working in the waiting room, and I'm back, and I said I wasn't going to interrupt until, but that was the moment where you set me up, and we're going to give this back to you after, I promise. But what you just said about the collaborative writing process is so incredible. I'm going to bring David on. Hold on. And then I'll finish my thought. But let me bring David into the stream. David Licken, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be here. Good evening. Good to see you, David Mann. Man,
yeah, likewise. Long time.
Yeah, we're recording a podcast tomorrow. So
yeah.
Go figure, the 6 degrees of separation. But what I'm going to call it John David Mann, JDM, going forward. So I don't confuse
good deal.
David Licken. That is exactly it. David and I started working months ago on his book, and we did not have that. JDM, what you just described.
Yes.
That wasn't it. We had a concept, we had a direction, and we worked out content. And then it was, no, we're going in this specific direction. And we were quasi there. But David, correct me if I'm wrong. I think once we both started looking at the Go Giver, it was very much this would be more relatable in a parable style.
Yeah, it was a combination of your books, John, the Go Giver series. Yes. And then, of course, Patrick Lencioni also writes in the same style. So it was a combination of the two of you and how your ability to tell a story and weave in the principles that you want to share with that. My favorite one, of course, is the Go Giver Marriage, your most recent book. I just am such a raving fan of it. Yeah. And I'm telling everybody about that. But and you weave in the principles so wonderfully without, teaching, preaching them. They're just there. And then as you get to the more of the instructional manual of how to apply those, you relate it to the story. So all of a sudden your heart's open. You can relate it to what the story is, which you do such an amazing job of writing.
Oh, thank you.
Hooking in. And so I love the style, and whatever I write you'll be always given the credit for that. You and Patrick Lencioni will be but I love how you do it and teaching in the principles at the end, and it's really ridiculous.
Let me share something about that. Then, and thank you. So it's so kind of you, and I greatly appreciate that. So it's interesting because when Bob and I wrote the Go Giver, there's 5 laws. They call it 5 laws of stratospheric success. We call them in the Go Giver, and there's 5 principles, core principles of the book. When we wrote that book, we did not first figure out we had these 5 principles and then set about saying, well, now how can we make a story out of that? That's not what happened. What happened was we had this general idea, that the idea being, when you focus on how can I give value to other people, focus on other people in terms of how you can improve their lives, it comes back to you manifold, right? The idea as old as the Bible, as old as the hills, as old as humanity's wisdom. But we didn't have 5 laws. What happened was, in the course of writing the story, of letting the characters go where they go and do what they do, it kind of, the spirit of the book and the sort of the philosophy underlying the book coalesced in the form of these principles. And I say that because you take a book like we were just talking about my thrillers, the novels. The first one was called Steel Fear, and yes, it is a book about a Navy SEAL pursuing a serial killer, but it's also a parable about leadership. And Nico, we were talking about crime reads, right? The article that I got in crime reads was, oh no, I'm sorry, it was in some other publication I had it. So scratch the crime reads thing. Anyway, I published an article around then called A Leadership Parable Disguised as a Crime Novel. And it's a book about leadership. Cold Fear turns out to be a book about friendship. And I didn't know that that's what this was going to be when I started writing it. All I knew was that now Finn is in Iceland and he's tracking down these three guys, and there's this woman who died, and there's this terrible, international global plot, and blah, blah, blah. But what happens is, this goes back to your question, Nico, as you're letting these characters come to life in the page. And David, you talked about opening your heart. You have to open your heart to these characters.
You really do.
Here's the secret. They're just you. That's all they are.
A different version of you. Yeah.
But you have to open up your heart to these characters. And as they come to life in the page, and as the story starts to develop in ways that feel authentic and true, and you'll have drafts of chapters that feel phony and fake and tawdry and shallow. And so you either toss them or you poke at them until they actually come to life and start to feel deeper and more authentic and true. As you do all that, you realize that the things that really matter to you most start showing up.
Interesting.
Stephen King wrote that, talking about this often highfalutin thing of theme. People ask him, what about theme? He says, I write a first draft without thinking about theme at all. And then I'm going through it as a reader, looking through the first draft to make the second draft. And I start noticing that I've hit on certain themes again and again and again. And I'll do work to bring them out a little bit more. I find that to be so. As I'm developing a story, I'll suddenly go, and this happened to me with Cold Fear. I suddenly realized I'm writing about friendship. I'm writing about friendship and betrayal. I didn't set out to do that, but that's kind of what's showing up. And I love it when that happens. For me, it's like when that starts happening, it's working. The writing is taking over, and it's showing you what matters to you, what's important to you.
I think what's so fascinating about that, John, I've often said, I know I'm pregnant with at least 3 books. And maybe 5. And you start looking at that as a metaphor. What you're just talking about there is when you start gestating a book, when you start writing it, it's like week 1, week 2, week 3. You don't know it's a male or female. You don't know, all the attributes of this thing that you're going to birth until you get to the day. And you sonogram it, and you get a lot of, now we have technology, but I think this is a principle that I am learning as a fledglingly writer. I'm working with Matt. He does the magic work. I come up with the crazy ideas on it, but I really think this is something, and I just wanted to interject that on being a brand new writer and joining the process, of which, John, you have inspired me in so many ways on. And I think there may be a principle, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that as
I love it.
A metaphor.
I love it. I think it's really, really wonderful, because you'll see frequently the debate. There's a debate in writer circles about writing with an outline or just going from, they call them pantsers, going from the seat of your pants. And I've seen frequently 2 famous writers on stage, one on holding each position, and I don't know. What I find is I suspect that the argument is spurious and it's a bit specious, and it's somewhat for show. Maybe not, I don't know. But for me, it's always both, and it goes back and forth. And what I mean by that is I'm a structure guy. I love structure, and I love outlines, but the outline doesn't tell the story. I have an outline, but it emerges out of writing. I'll work on the story. I start with a situation, which is sort of like the impregnation of this new, it's the conception of this new idea. I don't even, as you say, no, boy or girl, human, we hope, we don't know, what's going on. And then as the story starts to develop limbs and digits starts to show up, then I'll make an outline that sort of shows what it is I'm writing. And then I'll mess with the outline a little bit, and I'll say,
wait, the outline is what you already did?
The outline is what I'm in the middle of doing. So I develop the outline out of first formless thoughts, and then I have the outline here. And as the outline grows, maybe on the outline I'll say, oh, you know what would be interesting if this happened earlier. And so then I'll go back to my draft and I'll take that big chunk of this and I'll move it pages earlier. And then I'll be on the draft and I'll start saying, oh, this character does this, and we do this, and we do this, and we do this, and this is now changed. I'll go back and change the outline so that it fits what just happened. So that by the end of writing the book, I have an outline that absolutely accurately describes what just happened.
Interesting.
And while I'm writing it, I'm always aware of the outline, but which one tells, it's back and forth for me. I like to have, it's kind of the 20,000 foot view and the at the ground level view.
Ooh, great.
I go back and forth.
I need to jump here and echo with JDM just said. Yes, and yes. Yeah. My outlines, David will tell you, we start at this level of, hey, these are our containers. Every outline is a container.
Yeah.
This is where we're going to organize our data, our information, our story, like chronological, whatever we think it is. That's not necessarily what it's going to be. That is where we start, right? And David, you can speak to this. This is where we've gone. We had a whole direction that was all business principles and whatever. And I was coaching him toward that direction. And then it became, no, I want it to be a more relatable, understandable, digestible story.
Right.
And that's where we brought up your name, JDM. And it became how do we incorporate the principles of the Go-Givers into these complex leadership principles? And they just tie together so wonderfully because people don't want to be preached to. This is what I've learned. I've written over 15 books for people. They don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to be told how to do it. Yes,
they want to be inspired. They want to be inspired. I think it speaks to the heart. It's an inspirational thing. And I think when, like in the book, The Go-Giver Marriage, John and his wife, precious wife, oh dear God, Anna is such amazing. They do such a great job of weaving in a story that touches your heart, and the way they're bringing in the various characters almost draws in the whole population without anyone knowing it. I mean, there's all the different elements of personalities that are represented there, and it is just so masterfully done. And you're hooked in the story, and you look at it, it's very much of a biblical proverb. And, you follow Jesus or you don't follow Jesus. You look at it, he used a parable, and then he pulled his disciples aside afterwards and then taught them the principles. It's like your book, JDM, follow that. It is following your book. You tell a story. It's a parable. And then you pull your listeners aside, almost like they're disciples. They're almost like, okay, now for you that want to read what really is behind this, these are the principles that are embodied in that parable. And I love that sound. And I think people's hearts and minds are more open at that point. So it's the path I'm going to go down, I believe, in all of my books, inspired by you again.
I'm just putting myself in the minds of people watching this right now and going, wait, there's a seal and there's a serial killer, and wait, it's marriage is wait. Sorry guys, we're wide ranging here. What can I tell you? You have to stay with the program, follow the players.
You sound by segmented by minute, but
I could suggest that that's all embodied in a marriage anyway. Whether it be all aspects, everyone who's been married for an amount of time has thought about being a serial murderer at some point in time, depending on how that's gone.
But people have asked me, actually, isn't it weird going from these feel good books about how to live live his life to writing about grisly murders and horrible things? And it's weird only in the sense that it looks a little weird. It is kind of a change of gears, but not really, because what you're really doing, at least for me, what you're really doing is you're writing the hero's journey. I mean, you're writing a book about the human condition. To me, what is, and actually, Nico, the real article in the Crime Reads was about, the title of it was, "What's a nice guy like me doing in a homicidal place like this?" And
that's a nice title.
The thrust of the article was, I've always written these uplifting books and articles and teachings, and as a speaker, it's what I've always taught about, is ways that uplift us and help us lead a noble life, a fulfilling life, a rich life. And so, what am I doing? Writing about grisly murders. and it's, for me, there is a redemption. There is the nobility of someone like Finn, someone who's suffered greatly, someone who is still suffering greatly, thrust into an extraordinarily difficult situation, and not only finding his way out of it, but feeling compelled to lift up others at the same time and help them out of it. It is a different kind of uplifting narrative. It is a different kind of parable, and I'll say it again: it's a parable disguised as a crime novel. That for me is sort of the payoff of writing a book like this.
So, John, before I exit and I take David with me, I'll
Yes.
give David a chance to say anything else. But I agree with you. I think every piece of writing, if it's written strictly to write and there's no underlying meaning, there's no emotion you're trying to convey, there's nothing, it's superficial, it's just words.
Technique.
You may do well on your first one, maybe, most likely you won't, but maybe you do. Maybe you hype it up.
So.
But the writers who excel from my professional standpoint, they do that. There's something where every person can look at it. I will share it with the audience. I downloaded Animal Farm and 1984 on Audible 2 weeks ago. I already finished Animal Farm and I'm about a third of the way through 1984. Because the times that we are living in right now scare the ever-living Jesus out of me. And I think people need to realize that authors' takes and things that maybe people are afraid to say in a public forum, when they fictionalize them, when they parabolize them, that may not be a word, but I'm coining it if it isn't.
Right.
When they do this is their way of telling the world,
interesting,
I see something that I'm not comfortable telling you outright.
As a book should.
And there is lessons to be learned. I mean, I thought I knew 1984. I'm 3 hours into a 12-hour book.
Layered.
And my mind is blown. I'm literally like, how did we not see this?
Exactly.
And I thought I knew this.
I've read it twice. So I understand.
Yeah. I appreciate what you do, JDM. Keep doing it. I want to keep you in the Pen podcast, Pen for Hire community. You are an amazing friend, resource contributor. I swear with that, I am done. I'm going to leave you, Nico, for any closing remarks. And then, David, when you're done, I'll be in our Zoom room so we can go to our meeting. But I don't want to cut anyone else short. I'm just going to exit camera because otherwise I'll jump in and say something. All I need to say, I love you guys. I appreciate the messages of truth and the ways to express it. This is why we started this podcast. And I love you all. And I'm so grateful for you jumping on and being a part of it.
Right on, man.
It's such a joy. Yeah, I'll just add this. I'm a trained musician, so when you can play. I'm a vocal major, so I have all the music theory and all that. But you can play or sing something technically perfect, and then you can sing it with a true artistic expression from a place of pain. Jazz is one of those things that there's so much expression. John David Mann writes as a masterful jazz musician. It just something comes out and it moves your soul. And so that's what I love about it. I'm enjoying it. I'm so glad. And I want to thank you all for introducing me to JDM or John David Mann. So looking forward to our interview tomorrow, John. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Guys. I'll head out of here. Thank you. I can figure out how to do it. There he goes. Okay, leave studio. Got it. Bye.
That was too much. Here we are. It's just us. Just us guys.
The singing you praises because you're doing something right. Your writing process is very intriguing, and I was also interested in knowing how Brandon's SOF REP media company was used as an intel platform to help guide plot or help guide your plot in the novels.
Yeah, it's interesting because the first book, Steel Fear, clearly had a military context because this is a naval aircraft carrier, right? I mean, it's everybody on board is in the Navy, so it's obviously military context. The second book is not, and the books really aren't fundamentally military books. There, even though Finn is an active duty Navy SEAL now, by book 2 he's an AWOL, or the Navy call it UA, unauthorized absence. He's a criminally absent Navy SEAL, but he's still active duty.
They give him
well. I mean, you're not supposed to go AWOL, man. That's not cool. That ain't even legal.
What if something happens to you? You got it's criminal.
Oh no, man. He's on the run. He's a fugitive from the law. Is what's going on.
Oh, so he's not on the. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So point is that he's in a totally civilian environment, and really the books are not military books fundamentally, but there is a sort of international not foreign policy, but international affairs slant to the second book, certainly, and as there will be to the third book. And that is informed to some extent by Brandon's company. Brandon runs this media company called SOFREP, SOFREP. It means Special Operations Forces Report.
Interesting.
It's acronym they just invented, but it's a SOFREP. You know, a SITREP is a situation report. SITREP. Give me a SITREP, so they say in the military. Well, this is SOFREP. And it started out as just a media company blog about special operations forces, so SEALs and Green Berets and so on and so forth, MARSOC. But it's broadened to become really a media company about foreign policy and international affairs broadly, military particularly, but just foreign affairs broadly. And so that his perspective and the huge network of friends and sources that he has around the world are an awesome resource. But honestly, our imagination is an even bigger resource. Donald Westlake, who was one of those prolific crime authors, a wonderful man. He created the character Starker and Parker. And he writes these remarkable novels. He wrote something like 100 novels. No one knows exactly how many, in all kinds of circumstances, all kinds of settings, in financial and political and all kinds of things. And somebody once asked him, it was Laura Lippman once asked him, how do you write about subjects that you really don't know about with such authority? How do you research these? How do you learn all this stuff? And his answer was, I think if you really think about the situation and the characters that you've come up with, you'll get it right. And I love it because, one of the things that's really been pleasing to me in some of the reviews of the books, we're starting to get reviews of Cold Fear now, early reviews. And several of the reviewers have pointed out the Icelandic detective, Krista Kristjansdóttir, who's a woman. And like Monica Halsey in the first book, people have really singled out my female characters for praise. And I love that because, somebody will say, well, how do you write a woman so authentically, like not being one? And, I'm not anything. I'm not anybody but me. It's like, I'm not a military person. I'm not a paraplegic. I'm not a downhill skier. I'm not a surgeon.
You know why I think though? It's because you're a blank canvas. You're like at ground zero. So when you get that perspective from that person, you're able to immediately understand it because you don't have a bias against what they're telling you. So you can immediately believe them like, oh, that's how it is in the military. Okay, now I understand, and you can immediately adapt that to your material.
And there's a quality which I think is really important. I've never been a stage actor or a film actor, but I am imagining that this would be something that you'd easily say if you were a super accomplished film actor or stage actor. I think as a writer, stepping into a character like my Krista, the Icelandic detective, and getting her right so that every word she says rings true and that the character feels authentic all the way through and complex. Stepping into that character, what it takes is not so much knowledge as empathy. You have to have, it's like if you can sit and listen to a person talking and be empathetic, so that rather than sitting there and analyzing what they're saying, you're getting it, you're feeling it. You have to have empathy as I think as a person, to be able to write characters that are different than yourself, which is basically every character, really,
Right,
unless
right.
you're just writing your autobiography, disguised autobiography, and
Right.
what interest is that? So I'm really happy about that, and that's one of the great rewards of writing a book like this, writing a full novel where you develop a character in great depth, is you get to be somebody, to feel them, feel their life, step into their life.
Now, you initially decided to write those characters back in 2021, way before the unfolding of the current events. Was that purely by coincidence, or if not, how did that even happen?
Yeah. There's a so I should explain. In Cold Fear, it's set in Iceland, of course, and the
Hmm.
main characters are American, Finn, but there's an Icelandic. There's several Icelandic characters, but there's a Ukrainian woman who appears in the scene and
Hmm.
who becomes a pretty central character, Oksana Shevchenko, and she talks about her parents being assassinated by basically uh, by Moscow, by Russia,
Hmm.
um, and and um, and she talks about Russia, and it evolves. This is not a huge spoiler alert, but it evolves in the story that there is a sort of a shadowy Russian character by the name of Petrov, who may or may not be behind some huge and very heinous international bad doings.
Hmm.
And so, we had it's not they're not the central characters of the plot, but we had the situation where we got this Ukrainian woman and this Russian villain,
Hmm.
and it was almost eerie for us to have this book come out now. I mean, the first draft was done, almost a year ago, last August,
Hmm.
and Russia hadn't invaded Ukraine yet. We had no idea that we would be living in the news that we're living now.
Correct.
But these things do happen, when
It's
you're
all
writing
cool.
about the world.
Yeah.
It happens. And honestly, Nico, I mean, it wouldn't have been that difficult to pick up the signals a year ago. It wasn't that difficult to pick up the signals 10 years ago.
Hmm.
Putin was, the way he was talking about, I once heard him on a news program talk about how the collapse of the Soviet Union was for him the great tragedy of the 20th century. And the way he said it, it's like you come away from that news program going, oh, I get it. This guy wants to bring it back. This is his agenda. He wants to. So, the things that are going on today
Hmm.
are maybe shocking and they may be awful, but they're hardly surprising if you've had your eye at all on the international situation.
Now, would that be a potential hint at the upcoming theme for the third book?
Nah, nothing, not even remotely related. Not going to Russia, not going to Ukraine, not going to Europe. In fact,
Okay, just making
whole
sure.
new environment. One of the secrets, or one of the. So I realize we don't have a lot of time left, but part of the challenge and the joy of
Mhm.
these novels is that there is a procedural element in every one of them. Procedural meaning, like detective work.
Mhm, mhm.
Someone trying to figure something out, and what are the steps they go through? It's like watching CSI. It's all
Right.
pure procedure. We're
Mhm,
fascinated
mhm.
by this stuff. So the procedural stuff is fun because I have to figure it out while it's happening, and so I'm going through
Correct.
the same process the character's going through, which the reader will
Mhm,
go through.
mhm.
Cold Fear, there's a whole procedural process. This detective, Krista,
Right.
is trying to figure out several things, and there are several other procedural issues going on. So there's the procedural mystery side. Then there's the psychological interior side. Just Finn is on a personal quest that has to do with his past, recent past and distant past. He has
Mhm.
huge holes in his memory, and he has huge traumas in his soul. And so there's this sort of whole psychological interior search that is another strand of the plot. And then there's this heinous plot. There's this awful, there's a murderer somewhere in this story, and there's some really bad stuff going on. And that of course is a third thread
Mhm.
that threads through. All of that is colored by the characters, and is all woven by the characters as they come to life. But there's one more ingredient, which is the environment.
Interesting.
And in Steel Fear, the whole thing took place in an aircraft carrier. It's like a steel tube the
Mhm.
size of the Empire State Building,
Mhm, mhm.
laid on its side, filled with 6,000 people,
That's the
sealed
parallel
and
of the
stuck on the
tiger.
water,
Oh
right?
my goodness, nice.
So Cold Fear, the environment is Iceland in the middle of winter in a cold spell. So in each of these books, we've come up with a claustrophobic environment that puts these strands of plot and these characters in this crucible. And then part of the fun and the challenge of the book is to describe that environment in such a way that you, the reader, absolutely feel like you are there. And the same is true of Cold Fear, of Reykjavik. When you come out of this book, my hope is, and my belief is, you're going to know a lot about Iceland. You're going to feel like you've been to Iceland for weeks, like you really know this place. And so book 3 will be a completely different environment.
Now, just as a closing remarks, what is the greatest fun that you have when you're creating these books?
I think the greatest fun is solving problems. It's also it's my go-to technique. My go-to technique when I'm stuck is to stop trying to write and start and look for the best questions to ask. I pose myself questions, and sometimes what I'll do, I'll come out of. I tend to write for 3 hours in the morning, 5:30 or so in the morning until 8:30. I have this chunk of time where I focus on the book, and then I will do some more writing through the day. But that's kind of like my sacred time. In that chunk of time, I may not come up with anything other than a couple of key questions that I hadn't thought of before about my story that I need to be asking myself. And then I'll just roll them around the back of my head. They'll be there when I'm walking the dog or cooking breakfast or talking with my wife or do whatever I'm doing. And answers will start to pop eventually. Formulating the question is the hard work for me. What's the most rewarding part? It's when little answers start to pop. I was like, oh, it's like popcorn. I didn't see that coming. I didn't know that was going to be the solution to this. How cool is that? All the discoveries that happened. Can I give you one cool discovery that happened? In Steel Fear, when I started out writing a scene that happened in Finn's childhood, where a terrible thing happened. Those of you who haven't read Steel Fear, I won't give it away. But the book, the first draft, originally opened with a scene in his childhood where he goes through this horrifying experience, and in his mind he's thinking about the tadpoles that he and his brother just saw at a nearby pond, and these tadpoles become like monsters in his head, and he identifies this horrifying thing that's happened with a swarm of billions of tadpoles swarming in his brain. It's a terrifying scene. I ended up cutting it out of the book and then moving it to much later in the book, and it still is in the book, but it's toward the end, where Finn has been kind of haunted by this childhood distortion image of tadpoles. He pictures death as this large thing with no arms and legs, mostly head, and it's a giant tadpole. So there's a ritual that they go through on naval ships, crossing the line. When you cross over the equator, that those sailors who've never crossed the equator before, they're like the initiates. And the older sailors who've done this before, they're the tormentors. And it's like a hazing in a way. I mean, they send them through tunnels and they beat them with hoses. They're not enough to do physical damage, but they spray them with foam and they soak them. They do all kinds of ridiculous things. But I was going to have Finn have this revelation in the middle of that scene. While I was researching that ritual, I discovered that they call the experienced sailors shellbacks, like tortoises, and the initiates, the new ones, they call pollywogs. They're tadpoles, man. They're tadpoles. I had no idea that when I created this trauma of Finn's that was typified by this swarm of a billion tadpoles, I had no idea that he was going to be in the middle of this ritual where tadpoles were being hazed and being pushed through a tunnel. And it's like when that dropped out of the sky, I tell you, Nico, I got such chills. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. This is in the book, and it is. It's in the book.
What do you do when you get the information? Do you speak it? Do you write it down? Do you type it up on your phone? How are you in the supermarket? And what do you do? Do you grab a napkin? Do you write it on your palm? Like how do you get that information so you don't
all the
forget?
above? All the above. Well, no, not all the above, but any of them. I scribble it down. I scribble things down.
Some of the above. Some of the above.
I have a voice dictation. There's a dozen of them, a million of them. I have a voice dictation app on my phone, and most days, if I'm out walking the dog, somewhere in the middle of that 1.5-2 mile walk, I will pull out my phone and dictate something.
Interesting.
I sometimes sleep with a pad of paper by the bed, but not usually, because most of the ideas I get in my sleep are just pure gibberish. I look up in the morning and I go, "You got to be kidding me!" But I do scribble things down on a pad. I scribble stuff in handwriting that's so illegible I almost can't read it the next day. I do get it down because I do find it will fade away. And but the thing about that, the thing I want to say though is the thing about the tadpoles and the pollywogs and the shellbacks. That stuff happens all the time. I mean, it happens regularly when you're. It's so cool because you'll find sudden confluences, sudden vertexes coming together. You'll have vectors that just converge in a point. You go, oh, I had no idea this works so well, but it works even better than I imagined. And this is like, it's like you feel like you're not writing this book. You're just like a receptive radio tube, and it's just being beamed at you from the universe. Is how it feels.
Now, for a final question, for those who have a hard time conforming to another person's perspective, what would you say for that person who has a hard time listening to criticism or receiving critical feedback? Like you mentioned earlier that you had to take a few days to like sit there and just swallow it in and regurgitate it to somebody else before you were capable of accepting what they were giving to you. So what would you say to somebody who has a hard time accepting that?
That's a really, really great question. And there's a preamble to it, which is there's also a way to give critique that's helpful and not so helpful. And one thing I found is I'm very picky about who I give a manuscript to. I have a small circle of friends that I trust. The way to give, for me, the way to give critique is first single out what you loved about the thing. Start with the positive. So here are all the things that I just think are phenomenal, and then follow that with, okay, here are some places where I had red flags, or where I wasn't sure, or where I got lost, don't always try to make it personal. Like, here's where I got lost, or here's where I wasn't sure, or here's where it wasn't clear to me, as opposed to, I don't think that works. That sucks. That guy character's unbelievable. Try to couch it that way, because you are dealing with the sensitive underbelly of another human being. But to your question, how do you receive this? There are two sort of faculties that you need to constructively absorb good critique. They're opposite, and you need them both. One of them is you have to have open-mindedness to the other person's critique. You have to have an open mind to understanding that this other person may be seeing something that you can't see right now.
Interesting.
But the other faculty is you have to have a rock solid belief in what you're doing. That is, you need to know, like your feet are anchored like oak roots down to the center of the earth.
Yeah.
That's right. 10 miles down. You need to know that there's a great story in here. There's a great story in here. I may not have hit the vein yet. I may not have quite tapped it yet, but I am on the way. I'm digging, I'm going for it.
Exactly.
And it's here, and it's great. And when I get it extracted, when I get it fully formed, it is going to be phenomenal. You have to believe in the value of what you have to say, because if you don't believe in the value of the extraordinary value of what you have to say, then it's really hard to take critique, because it's like it's just going to knock you down. You're like a tree with no roots. So you almost have to have an arrogance about your writing, and along with, I like to say, you have to have the arrogance of a teenager and the humility of a Buddhist monk.
Ooh, right? That's a good combination right there.
And you need them both, because just the arrogance of the teenager, you're never going to get anywhere near your potential, because you will cling to what you first wrote as being as good as you think it is, and it's not. It never is.
Oh.
So you need that Buddhist monk to say, I am an open page. I am a blank sheet of paper. Please give me your experience. Tell me what you think. Yes. You don't take every critique, by the way. you don't listen to, you don't follow everything that the person tells you. You don't. I have had editors tell me things that I was like, I don't think so. I don't agree with that. And I've had
Right.
things that they wanted me to change that I did not change, and I was proven right. So it is. And the other thing is, frequently an editor can tell you what needs to be fixed, but they cannot spell out for you exactly how to fix it. That's going to be
Ooh.
up to you.
Nudge in the right direction kind of thing. Or
Yeah.
like they're just like, hey, flashlight, this is where you need to focus your attention on this sentence here, or this idea, this character, this
Yeah.
concept, this paragraph.
Or
Just
if you can
does.
find some way to bring this part in earlier, but I
Mm-hmm.
can't tell you exactly where or exactly what it should look like or exactly how you should say it. But I just feel like the pacing is off, and you need to do, or whatever. That, yeah. But the ultimate solution is going to be yours.
Mm-hmm.
But they probably are seeing something that you can't yet see, and so think of them as your guides, your Sherpas.
So if it's not somebody that's giving you that gentle nudge in the right direction, you're essentially saying that you need to get a new editor.
Well, you need to have a really great editor. But I just give you one example. I took Steel Fear, the first book.
Mhm.
I took it to a story consultant before we had a publisher, before our agent even saw it, before anybody saw it. I took it to a story consultant and paid her $1,200, a really good story consultant, to do a complete workup on the book. So tell me,
Mhm.
lay it all out, the good, the bad, the ugly. Tell me what you like, tell me what you hate, tell me what I should do. I'm new at this. I've never written a novel before. And she did. She came back and she told me what was fantastic, and she
Mhm.
told me what did not work at all, and there was a ton that didn't work at all of which I changed, except she thought the ending was wrong, and that one character gets the bad guy, and she thought it should have been another character who got the bad guy, and she said
Mhm.
this definitely does not work the way it is. You absolutely definitely need to change this, and she was definitely absolutely not right. She was wrong. I kept it the way it was. I didn't change that, and it was the right decision.
Right.
So even the best editors will give you, they'll give you your 100%, and there will be 95% or 92% that is useful to you. There will always be a couple percent in there. Always be some points that you go,
It's like the 80-20. 80% of what they say is
yeah,
you. 20% it's like, that's your own opinion.
it's like that, something like that. Yeah. I find that to be true, and it takes trusting your own judgment and time, sifting it through over time. You need to entertain 100% of what they say. Consider it. Consider it as an option, and then ultimately you decide where you go.
Well, thank you so much, John David Mann, JDM, for being here. I just want to give you the opportunity to let everybody know where they can find your materials, your books, and anything else that you want them to find about you.
Good idea. I'll say three things. First, I have a website, which is me, johndavidmann.com. It's my name. You see it right here on the screen, johndavidmann.com. And all my books are there. However, the new book, Cold Fear, there has its own website, which there is some cool stuff on this site. There isn't yet, as you and I speak, Nico, but there will be within a week, a page on the Cold Fear site with our book tour, because Brandon and I are going to go on the road and do a bunch of bookstores around the country, as well as some virtual events. We're doing a virtual event with Brad Thor. We're doing a virtual event with Robert Crace. We're going to be in stores from coast to coast. And the website for Cold Fear is simply coldfearthebook.com. coldfearthebook.com. And the third thing I'll say is that I've just started reading. I'm reading one chapter a day of Cold Fear on my Instagram account. So if you want to hear me read Cold Fear, at least the first 31 chapters, I'm reading a chapter a day and putting them up on my Instagram account, which is simply @JohnDavidMann.
And now, you're using your like Instagram Reels or videos, or
Instagram videos. Yeah, they're like anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes per chapter. They're short, so like 4, 5, 6 minutes is your typical chapter. I'm doing one a day.
Nice. Well, you guys heard him. Check him out. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, if you guys have, any ideas about how we can improve, let us know. Once again, John, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for, being flexible enough with that sudden, extra, you know what I'm saying? I think that was one of the
The bridge game, yeah, it was 4 of us there. That was a surprise.
I think that was one of the best episodes we've ever had, one of the best surprises we've ever had. So thank you so much. And, thank you for giving us all this amazing behind the scenes on how you created, how you dedicate yourself writing 3 hours a day in order to be able to create this with Brandon, and utilizing all your resources possible, all your mind, your focus, your energy in order to create this masterpiece. And pretty much anything else that you're starting to do. It's like now you're starting to have that Midas touch, because now you know exactly what needs to be done. You're capable of listening to objections, the critical. You're capable of sliding, negating the positivity until it's time to deliver the finished product. So I've learned so much, and I could keep going. You could keep going. So I think we're just gonna have to wrap this up here. So thank you so much. And we're both calling from Massachusetts, so that makes me even happier too. So,
hey, man, cool.
All right. Other than
Appreciate
that,
the conversation, man. Thank you so much. This has been a blast.
all righty. And 3, 2, 1.